Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast, episode number 272 of the show. We got 6 reviews for this week on I'm Ramon Mejia, of course, here to bring in the latest in LitRPG stuff. This week I will be reviewing some nice, mostly good stuff. That's going to include Dungeon Core Online, Remastered. Also going to be reviewing Blessed Time, a LitRPG adventure. Original Enchantment, True Calling, Aethermarked, a dark fantasy GameLit Isekai, and the tutorial is way too hard. So we got those reviews coming in with some LitRPG news, and of course the upcoming and recent reviews. So before we get into any of that, we're going to hit some LitRPG news. And in the LitRPG news this week, we just got one nice little story. The LitRPG podcast went to Dragon Con in the last couple of weeks, and this is a short little video about, our time there. We completely understand that Dragon Con had this different vibe this year. So as you can see, most people were in masks, try to space each other out. Dragon Con did a wonderful job of trying to keep everybody safe. But mostly I hang out with the authors that I love and got to see some great cosplay. Went on a couple panels, saw some panels with my friends, ate good food. That was super amazing. Really enjoy the Mountaindale Press kind of get together with their authors and LitRPG fans there, including, Chris Johns, Shimmer Kuznets, and a bunch of other people. And to top it all off, at the end of it, we all went to medieval times. So it's a nice group of authors and some fans and some people just hanging out and having a good time at DragonCon. So it was a really great time to spend hanging out with the people that I like in the genre that I love. So that's the biggest bit of LitRPG news we have for the week. On to stuff that has come out recently, stuff that is out now for you to enjoy, and that's going to include An Outcast in Another World. Also a new story from Angelus Maximus, A Betrayal of the Arcani. The second book in the Dungeon of Story series called The Entropic Core. We also have a fourth and final book, I think, in the Jonathan Brooks The Dungeon Fairy series called The Dungeon Chorus Escapade. This also have the 11th book in the System Apocalypse series from Tao Wong, The Forbidden Zone. The second series in the Titans Online novel called Immortal. This is a superhero LitRPG. I'm surprised they put out a second one, but here it is. We're reviewing this one actually in the podcast this week, Original Enchantment, True Calling LitRPG. And there's a new Kaiju LitRPG story. Not sure how good it is, but hey, this is not many of these around. A new story from Shimmer Kuznets called Biomancer. It's set in the same universe as his other story, the New Era Online universe. So this is a separate series-ish, though I'm thinking. I haven't read it. I can't tell you more than that. He just told me that it does take place a bit farther after the end of the last series. So go check it out. Also, our Frostworld book number 2 is out. He Who Fights Out Monsters book number 3. People are loving this one. The third book in the Arcana Unlocked series is out, as is Bad Guys, book number 7 from Eric Ugland. Also, Jeff the Game Master book number 2 is out to enjoy. Cinnamon Bun volume 3 of the Wholesome LitRPG is out for you. The fourth book in the Apocalypse Cosmos series is out. Death Bone Knight book number 6 is out as well, as is Stray Shadows, which is the Arachnomancer book number 2. So it's that series with the spider thing. I haven't read it, so I can't tell you more than that, but people liked it. Also out is Minced Meat Foodstuffs book number 2. Did read this one, enjoyed the first book. Also out is Tower Power book number 6. And Artificial Jelly book number 2, that is out for you to enjoy as well, as is Alex Okres' latest dip into LitRPG with the Dungeon Core series called The Very Evil Dungeon. So there we go. Apocalypse Online is out as well, as is Battlefield Reclaimer. Phoenix Gray's 9th book in her series, The God of Death, is out for you. And the 9th book, of course, in the 10 Realm series, The 7th Realm Part 2 is out. This one already has over 1,000 reviews. Folks are loving it. Also out is the Dungeon of the Old Gods. So there we go. All kinds of new stuff for you to enjoy. We also have some new audiobooks that have come out recently. This one just came out today. the day of the recording. Dungeon Crawler Carl, book number 4, The Gate of the Feral Gods. Apparently, Matt Denham has been recently getting a lot of racy foot photos because of this book. And if you've read it or if you've listened to it, you'll understand why. Also out though is 8D6, which is the, I believe, 8th collection of short stories written in the Caverns and Creatures universe by Robert Bevan. So there you go. Oh, great. I was reincarnated as a farmer. Is out as an audiobook, as is the 10th book in the Dragonheart series. The He Who Fights a Monster book number 3 is out concurrently as an audiobook as well, as is Cinnamon Bun Volume 3. For folks who love the anime of this or the light novel series, Overlord is out as an audiobook. It's partly the read version of the light novel. Also out is Lost Bound, Binding Rules book number 6, which is doing really well for Daniel Schinofen. Dungeon Core Line, again, we're reviewing the ebook version of this. It is out as an audiobook as well. The Grand Game is out as an audiobook, as is the Crafter's Dynasty Dungeon Crafting book number 6 by Jonathan Brooks, and Lion's Quest book number 4. We reviewed this book on the podcast on the last episode, but there's an audiobook of this as well if you want to give it a shot there. Okay, in upcoming LitRPG, this is just where we read off of all the stuff that I know it's coming out in the near future. It is just me reading stuff. You can skip ahead if you want to, but there are some folks who really enjoy this and like knowing what's coming out so they can plan their reading schedule, their purchase schedule, or even their publishing schedule. Starting with September the 19th, we have Immersion Online, book number 2. On September 21st, we have World of Magic, book number 2. On September 23rd, The Ripple System, Black Sand Baron, book number 2. September 23rd, the 10th book in the Rise to Omniscience series called Soulstream. September 23rd, Underdog, book number 7. September 27th, it'll be The Sleepless Ones, book number 8, Clan Dominance. On September 28th as well, Epiphany Realms, book number 1. September the 30th, Finian Angelio's Unsanctioned Adventure. On September the 30th as well, it'll be Cat Core book number 2. September the 30th, Challenger's Call book number 7. October the 1st, Order, a superhero LitRPG adventure, VR Hero book number 4. October the 1st, a new entry from Vasily Mahenko, new series, new stuff. It is related to some of the other stories apparently though, called Idea, Starting Point book number 1. On October the 8th, it'll be The Weight of It All, book number 4. October the 11th, Project Stellar book number 5. October the 14th, In the System, book number 3, Defending Earth. October the 15th, the 5th book in the Divine Apostasy series, Legion's 5th Vault. On October the 15th, it'll be Demogorgon Colossus, Overtaken Online, book number 4. October the 15th, it'll be Cowboy Necromancer, book number 2. October the 18th, Unfrozen, book number 2. October the 19th, it'll be Darkon Prince. I don't know what that's about, but it's calling itself LitRPG. October 21st, it'll be The Player Reaches the Top, book number 7. On October 26th, the NPC's Path, book number 5. On October 26th, it'll be They Call Me Maddest, which is the 3rd book in that series. October 26th, Blessed Time, which is the 2nd book in the Blessed Time series. We're actually reviewing the 1st book on the podcast today. On October 26th, the Centennial Tournament, Infinite Realm, book number 3. On October 26th, the Underverse, book number 6. It feels like book number 5 just came out, and 6 is already going to come out in October. On October 31st, it is the Sword to the Plowshare Saga, book number 1, Mana Harvest. November the 2nd, it'll be Defiance of the Fall, book number 3, so lots of folks are looking forward to that one. On November the 4th, it'll be Discardium, book number 9. On November the 9th, it'll be The Legend of Randomly Ghost Town. Now, I've heard a lot about this. A lot of folks like it. It's a real world story. People swear by it, that it's amazing. So I'm looking forward to giving it a shot when it actually comes out. On November the 11th, it'll be The Range, book number 3, The Guardian of the Verge. Sometime after that, I forgot to put a date on it. Gates of Thunder, Loner, book number 1 is probably the November the 12th or 13th or something. On November the 16th, it'll be The Houndsman, a base building LitRPG. On November the 30th, it'll be Cleaver's Edge, a LitRPG fantasy cooking adventure Morkster chef book. There we go. It's about an orc who cooks as a chef, so a Morkster apparently. And that's all the stuff I know. It's come out in the near future, all the way to the end of November. And again, if you're an author and you have something to add to the list, you can send us an email at litrpgpodcast.com or at litrpgpodcast@gmail.com or at feedback@geekbytespodcast.com, or just send us a message on Facebook or Twitter. We're happy to get back to you. There we go. Now on to new releases and reviews. Okay, first up this week in the podcast is going to be Dungeon Core Online Remasters, book number 1, written by Jonathan Smits. It is 417 pages, $4.99. It's available on Kindle Unlimited, and here's the author's description. James thought he would be just another adventure on the world's most anticipated dungeon-delving VR MMORPG. But when he logs in, he soon finds out that he won't be diving in the dungeon, he will be creating it. Pretty awesome, right? At least that was what he thought when he boldly chose random as his dungeon type. Then he summoned his first snob, a fearsome, bloodthirsty, demonic chicken. Still, demonic farm animals are the least of his worries. The person who is supposed to be teaching him the ropes is a weirdly advanced AI pixie who drinks too much and is overly fond of gambling. Oh, and some mysterious figure seems to be watching and judging his every move, so signing that NDA is feeling like less and less of a solid choice. Either way, James is up for the challenge, even if it means building a dungeon like kamikaze sheep and rage cows, unhygienic pigs, and yes, Dickens. At least his next randomly selected mob can't be worse, right? Also, Leonardo says this is a revised, edited, and novelized retelling the popular Rare Robe web series Dungeon Core Online by Galax. Okay, this is a pretty straightforward Dungeon Core story. It is a demonic farm theme. It's an online serial story compiled and edited, and as such, it's essentially kind of a slice-of-life story for the most part. Especially the beginning, that's a little heavily front-loaded about game mechanics and details and the dungeon stuff. So much so that about 20% of the novel, that first 20%, about 80 pages worth, is just the main character getting into the game, becoming a dungeon core, and figuring out his dungeon build before the adventures actually show up. So you don't actually see the adventures coming in, tackling the dungeon until 80 pages into the story. So just be aware of that. But after that point, it really is something people are getting familiar with as far as like, adventurers come in, they tackle the stuff, they survive or they don't, and the dungeon core advances and trains and it unlocks new monsters, and there's a whole like detailed, well thought out system here that people who like dungeon core stories are going to be really familiar with. The thing I think that it's going to set this thing apart, and either you're going to like it or you're going to really not like it, is the sense of humor. There's a ton of like jokes and punny jokes and humor and gaming references and word naming jokes. There are little bit of authors mentioned here left and right. And it just is what it is. If you like that sense of humor and it makes you laugh, you're going to really like this. If the jokes make you groan and you don't, you're probably going to like this. And again, that's the thing that's probably going to be a deciding factor for you. For me, I had a good time with it. I did like the fact that eventually, about 70% in, there is a kind of a plot that shows up eventually. And I was like, oh, wait, I was not expecting any kind of plot. And I was kind of okay with that. This kind of bumped it up a little bit for me. And then I could see, oh, there's something to the series besides just dungeon design, dungeon build, adventurers come and recycle. There's a minor plot line with like a real life school thing, but it really isn't worth it to me. Like this other line showed at the same time somewhere. It's a little more like, oh, okay, here's some backstory, here's something for the series to develop. It doesn't really develop in this particular novel very much, but it is set up as like, oh, this is a thing that's going to recur in the next book, and we're going to develop it later. And I was like, okay, at least with something to look forward to as far as a bigger plot line. For me, it's overall a good slice of life dungeon core story, and I was okay with that. Give it a score of 7.6 out of 10. That's Dungeon Core Online Remastered Edition, book number 1, with a score of 7.6 out of 10. And next up, we have Blessed Time, a little bit adventure written by Kale Palaman. It is 412 pages, $4.99. It's available on Kindle Unlimited, and here's the author's description. Some disasters can only be avoided if you know they're coming. On Corel, you are either being blessed by the gods, granted a unique power and the ability to gain experience and levels, or you are forgotten. Micah Silver was a boy picked for greatness, chosen by the gods to bear a mythic power. He longed to take his place amongst the heroes and legends he grew up reading about. Unfortunately, his primary blessing only allows him to travel into the past by sacrificing his class, wealth, and levels. A psychological burden that Micah is reluctant to shoulder. But if Micah isn't willing, fate has a way of forcing you to face your destiny, and running away can cost you everything over and over again. So there you go. This is in the novel description. It does talk about this is a time loop LitRPG series with reluctant hero, catastrophes that are impossible to overcome. So talking about those aspects isn't going to spoil, I think, for anybody. This is definitely a slow burn story with the premise of the main character having the ability to travel back in time exactly 5 years doesn't actually come into play until you're like a quarter way through the story, until like 25% into it. And then the story, up until then, rather, it's a pretty slice of life story. So the first 25% doesn't feature the main premise at all, doesn't feature time travel. It really is just the main character going through his first, we'll call it iteration of his timeline, just making mistakes, making friends, having a little love and fun here and there. And then, of course, tragedy strikes. Something big happens that forces him to use his unique time travel power, and he ends up back 5 years into the past with all his foreknowledge of the things that are to come. And that's really what the story is. It is him going through these iterations of time travel of his life, rather, trying to fix things, trying to stop this catastrophe from happening, and the unintended consequences of just even sometimes the smallest changes to what he does. And in each iteration, he's very much training. He's very much doing magical theorizing. He's very much growing more and more powerful as it goes on. And I really liked that aspect of it, that there are very reasonable consequences to his deviations of events. And sometimes they did very well, sometimes they did not. But they were always not what the main character planned or expected to happen to him. And I really did enjoy like that concept, but I also appreciated the training stuff. I'm a big fan of like a main character working super hard for his power structure and for his power gains, and that definitely shows up in the story here. The end of it probably was probably stretched out a little bit too much for me. I feel like, the last 15% could have been cut off, and it would have been a perfectly good story, because by that time, the big event, the big catastrophe issue was resolved, and so the last 15% felt a little bit stretched. And I'm going to tell you, it's not without purpose. It really does lead into like, we're going to bring you book number 2 in a couple of weeks or in October. And so we need something to connect them. We need something to like continue on the story. And I absolutely get that. But it really did kind of stretch out a little too far from it. It was like, I would have been super satisfied with like the ending about a little bit earlier. It would have felt a little more, nice and neat, a little more better paced for me. But still, entertaining story overall. I like the way the time travel was worked in the story. It wasn't a catch-all for fixing everything that was wrong, and there were, again, very reasonable consequences to the changes that the main character made that were unexpected. So I did like that regional logical progression of somebody trying to change the past, just creating these different futures that nobody expected sometimes. So it granted score 7.6 out of 10 for Blessed Time, a little bit of adventure. Again, that's a 7.6 score for Blessed Time. Had a good time with it. And next up, we have Original Enchantment, True Calling LitRPG book number 1, written by Thad Ward. It is 314 pages, $5.99. It's available on Kindle Limited, and here's the author's description. O devs who art in the issue queue, hallowed be thy code, thy commits merge without conflict, thy will be done in production as it is on local. I'm sure you guys are busy and all, but I can't log out. As a programmer, Ike knows all about virtual dive experiences, but when he suddenly wakes up in a virtual game he's never heard of, he's too busy struggling to survive to worry about how he got there. Luckily, he's got a trick up his sleeve, the ability to program custom enchantments for his gear. He'll need that and more to figure out what's going on, since there's no tutorial and True Calling plays by its own rules. Your class and race are chosen for you, and the NPCs are indistinguishable from players. Every quest is unique, and GMs keep leaving Ike's prayers unanswered. Okay, this is a super slice of life story. It's a trapped in a game story, but I'll be honest, the trapped in the game part is not really necessary, and it's not really the most compelling thing about the story. Most of the story has the main character casually fighting monsters, questing, grouping. One thing that separates it a little bit from others is that the main character has an artificer class and that he crafts a lot. So there we go. That's kind of the thing. Other than that, it is monster fighting, town defense, eventually, character relationships, the normal stuff in the story. And it's a fine story if you like crafting like I do. And I did appreciate some of the details about the class and how the main character maximizes those class features and abilities to gain some measure of power, because he's definitely doesn't start out strong at all. He's not an OP character, but he does get stronger over time by being smart about how he plays and what he's doing, and how he adventures, essentially. There are a few details that were a little off-putting in the story for me, which is, it's still a good story, on the lower end of 7, though. I don't think the main character really needed to do trapped in the game. This is one of those things for me. It's like, if you're going to do trapped in the game, do it well. And if it doesn't do well, it's one of the things that kind of detracts a little bit for me. The trapped in the game element didn't add anything to the story whatsoever. The main character's life is never threatened, and he's not really sure what happens to him if he dies. And he is the only person who's trapped, so it's really just him in the game, most of the time, just trying to not talk about it. The only thing that connects the story is a very minor thread in the novel, with the business and the main character having signed an NDA, which is why he can't tell anybody he's trapped in the game for some reason. And like, that seems like a weird thing to have, if you're trapped in the game. Like, why would you ever sign a non-disclosure agreement saying you can't tell anybody if you can't get out, because then you can't ask for help? And I'm like, like I said, it didn't add anything. It just detracted slightly, for me at least. And that story thread really doesn't go anywhere whatsoever until like the very, very end. And at that point, it's like, oh, okay, you're trying to connect this to the next story, and this is your thing. I'm like, okay. There are also a few wand whipping moments from the end of the game that didn't really make sense as far as game mechanic terms that were established, but overall, it's fine. Like I said, it's a fun slice of life story. If you like crafting, if that's not your thing, you might not like it as much, because it really doesn't bring anything new to the table besides that. For me, had a good time with this show, 7.2 out of 10. That's again on the lower end of good. I still had a fine time. Not my favorite story of the week, but don't regret reading it whatsoever. It's original Enchantment, True Calling LitRPG, book number 1 with the score of 7.2 out of 10. Okay, next up is Aethermarked, a dark fantasy game-lit Isekai, written by Damian Hansen and Nolan Locke. It is 557 pages, $4.99. It's available on Kindle Unlimited. Full disclosure, I've received an advance copy for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. Here's the author's description. Friendless, broken by grief, tired of the real world, Jin E represents the perfect candidate for the new on-site 24/7 fully immersive gaming sensation, Aethermarked. Of course, becoming Felania Trevelyan is more than she ever dreamed, and more than she bargained for. From the moment she submerges into a vat of conductive nanogel and chooses her first spell, she's captivated at the reality and wonder of the wide, magical world around her. A new life so different that she's had in the real world. That is, until the game refuses to let her out. Ginny has no choice to become her character and trust the people behind the game are honestly trying to free her rather than use her as a televised marketing sensation to drive us fails. Things take a turn down a dark path when Fenelia faces down eldritch horrors and battles fiends for her very survival. It is only then that she realized that what she thought was a game may be more than she bargained for. And there's a warning here. It says, things get dark at times. There might be some content you find traumatic. This LitRPG Isekai contains scenes of torture and minor fade to black sexual content. So there we go. I didn't end up liking this story. I kind of wanted to. There are definitely elements that I thought were nicely done. But overall, I found it to be a frustrating reading experience, mostly because of issues of the story that made it feel less cohesive. And there are just some really super annoying things that happened to the story. I was like, no, this doesn't work. First of all, let me talk about the things I enjoyed. The story does a good job of fleshing out the backstory of the MMO character. Again, not the main character, Ginny, but the character she becomes. In that it does like some, after character creation, it does some fleshing out like memories. Like it shows the main character as her game character as a little girl playing a chess-like board game with their dad, and I thought that was probably one of the best scenes in the entire story, mostly because it did something that was really well. It did world building. It fleshed out the main character and her relationship with her father. And at the same time, it kind of gave you a hint at the game mechanics of the story through the game itself. Like the little girl and her father are playing this board game, and there are 4 different factions that are supposed to represent the factions in their world. And the dad is like playing the game, playing different sections, and they're at the same time describing their interaction. They're giving information to the reader about, oh, these are the character classes, these are powers, this is how they use them on a regular basis, these are their interfaction, issues and how they come about. And it's just like a really nicely well done summarized section that I thought was like really on point tonight. And if that's what that story had been, if the story there's a story had been that main character exploring those factions, exploring that world building, going throughout the world, seeing that scene, I think I would have liked it. I would have enjoyed that story there. That's not what this is, though. Like, the novel description talks about the main character being trapped in an MMO and things like, oh, is the game company using her for publicity purposes? Are they really trying to get her out? And to be honest, that stuff does exist. It is in the first 20-25% of the story, and it kind of peters in a little bit. But for the most part, none of that matters. It really doesn't. Like, the setup in the beginning of the story has no bearing on the rest of it. And I'm like, and that was an issue for you. Like, the things that are set up in the beginning of the story leave some huge gaping plot holes as the story progresses. Like, there are things that happen that I'm like, this is set up as an MMO game, and there's issues with the game mechanics, but at the same time, it is basically a fantasy time travel story. And I'll get into all that later, but it's like there's this huge conflict between those two kind of themes in the story, the game stuff as an MMO and the fantasy time travel stuff. And those things conflict so hard that it ended up making me just not like the story, unfortunately. But again, good things first. Sorry, good things first. We're talking about good things first. The game system in the story is actually really well fleshed out. I think you can tell that the authors put a lot of time and effort into thinking of this balanced system. Class powers for each particular faction has their own unique character classes, their own unique powers and abilities, and they seem to balance each other out in the beginning of the story. And again, I like that design aspect. And again, unfortunately, it doesn't matter to the story. Like, those abilities, those separate classes and powers don't matter, because they eventually in the story, things happen that show them to not be such a rigid game structure. I'll leave it at that, I guess. But there's just things that happen with the main characters, like, oh, all that early stuff, nope. Doesn't matter. Not to say that the game powers don't continue to show through the story, and that this isn't LitRPG. It is. There are regular notifications. The main character levels up, even though she probably shouldn't as much. But it really felt like, as the story progressed in the novel, that it was more and more of just like a fantasy story with time travel, and that the game mechanics existed as a way to describe the powers and not as an interesting aspect and a fully fleshed out part of this world in the first place. It felt like they were just reflective of power game, and that the story could have existed without them, to a degree. Not the trapped in the game part stuff and that element of that is fully part of the story, but like the actual description of the powers themselves, the actual mechanics of the thing, that would have just wasn't as important to the story, unfortunately. The very beginning of the story. So on to some of the things I didn't like. I mentioned a couple of them. There's some things that I just found annoying. Other things that I found like, story breaking for me, at least. The very beginning of the story, the setup about full immersion, the main character going to a full immersion game and winning this contest, super annoying to me. And that's mostly because from the writing, I could tell that it wasn't going to matter in the story. Like, it was that the writing itself felt very perfunctory, felt very like, there's a lot of grandiose writing, and it's set up like this Charlie in the Charlotte Factory kind of opening where the main character applies for her spot in this new game that nobody's ever played before. It's supposed to be amazing, but you probably should have questioned why the fact they asked if she had any living relatives or people who were going to miss her. She disappeared. And yet she wins, and she's super happy, and there's this big fanfare in the beginning of the story, and I'm like, as I'm reading it just kind of fell flat. I'm like, man, this lady's gonna be trapped in this game, and none of this is gonna matter, is it? And totally right. I mean, it's in the novel description. It's not spoilery whatsoever. But at the same time, all that early setup stuff, almost none of it comes back. Like the main character, without getting spoilery, none of that matters to the story whatsoever. The entire thing is gets her in the game, and it just didn't matter as far as that, and that kind of frustrating because you spend time, you have an expectation that even with the Chapter of the Game story, you have expectation that this is supposed to be an MMO world, and so along with that, you have as a gamer expectations of what this is going to be like, and none of that really applies to the story, unfortunately. Thankfully, though, that opening didn't last too long. About the 4% mark, main characters, so that's perfectly fine. The early part of the story, on the whole, wasn't half bad. I didn't care for the forced romance, where the main character asked the game to copy a memory of her bad ex-boyfriend, and then asked the game to block her memory of it so she thinks it's a natural romance. I thought that was definitely odd and weird. I mean, I know the author's kind of inserted to show that the game could change your memories, but it's just kind of a weird thing to insert as a romance section. I'm like, okay. But it wasn't like terrible enough to like made me start reading. Just okay, that kind of showed you the level of like, what to expect for the romance options in this novel, and that definitely panned out like I thought it would. Things that made the story more how to say unbearable, but just not likable for me. The Trapped in the Game plotline. It shows up by the 14% mark, and I'll be honest, the story was doing fine without it. Like up until that point, it was very slice of life. The main character had gone through the memory cutscenes that fleshed out her backstory for her game character, and she was just going along the world, exploring things, making friends, going on adventures, fighting monsters. I'm like, this is kind of nice. It gradually showed what her class options were, what she could do with them, and exploring those powers. And it felt very familiar and nice and slice of life. And I really liked. I was okay with that. I was having a good time. And then 40% arc, Trapped in the Game. I was like, oh, okay, I was right. And to be honest, the Trapped in the Game stuff really interrupts what could have been an interesting storyline about intrigue and guile-based abilities and factions vying for control and power within country. Like there's a lot of like really cool story options and paths that it could have taken from like that early section of the story. But none of that is really none of that is really fleshed out to a great degree. It then becomes about the main character being trapped in the game and essentially being forced down story paths because of it. And that's what all the Trapped in the Games thing really does here. It really just forces her to do certain things because the game administrators or the person who's they're saying, oh no, we have no idea what's happening here. Maybe you should finish this really difficult and life-threatening quest line to try to reset the game. And it really felt super forced, and that the story was meant to go down this path so that the main character get these different powers, interact with these different characters, and it being, heroes or villains or whatever the case is in the story. But it felt super forced, and it felt really unnatural because if you're trapped in the game, and if you die in the game, you die in real life, you're not going to do dangerous things. I mean, that's pretty much the option. I mean, really, if you look at other stories and that's fleshed out and that feels very real, and that you look at Sword Art Online or the story had the same premise, most people just did not want to threaten their lives, and that's a very natural feeling. So to force the main character down this path where she's in super danger and things do not go well, like the story warning says, things get dark, and they certainly do, and that includes her being tortured and mentally tortured and physically tortured through like magical powers, and it's described. There's no way that a real person would ever choose to do that stuff, especially considering that she's feeling full amounts of pain. And it's just one of those things that wasn't done well with the Trapped in the Game system. And that's really hard to get right, which is one of the reasons I don't really like when I see Trapped in the Game, because a lot of people just can't get it right. Like Sword Art Online is the thing they look at as the model for it, but in that story, there's a huge variety of people in this situation, and they show the tension, they show the threat to your life by killing people in the game who are trapped there, and giving them permanent deaths and making them feel important to you and then murder them off. And so when the main character risks his life to try to free everyone, it matters. It's a real risk that he's taking. You feel that threat because there's a real possibility they can die. But in a lot of games who do trapped in the game and die in the game down their life, that doesn't exist. Instead, it becomes a thing where the main character is never going to die no matter what they do, whatever risks they take, whatever things they go through. And it ruins the tension because in real life, in real gaming terms, characters die. They die. You reset. You respawn. That's the whole point of it, to learn from your failures and your experiences. And so when that doesn't exist in a game that's supposed to be an MMO, even though apparently there are no other players in this MMO, that kind of clashes with the expectations of what an MMO is supposed to be. One of those things that is hard to get right. Additionally, the story halfway through kind of seems to abandon the game stuff, or that at least how important it is to a large degree, as it introduces time travel, which is not. It's kind of hinted in the game mechanics that exists, but the way it's used and the way the powers are given to the main character completely ignores any of the actual MMO game stuff that happens. And there's some contrived story reason why this exists, but it really just feels like, the authors wanted to play with these other powers. And the way the main character gains his power and other powers and does that is because she needs them when she needs them. And so she magically gains them anytime she has a need for them. She literally is grabbing powers from all the other classes, all the other things without meeting any prereqs or earning any effort, to be honest. And that felt really cheap for me in terms of like game progression. Like all the power she got, she never earned. So that's always a big deal for me. But the time travel especially is hard to get right in the story. And this one doesn't, unfortunately. It's used as this kind of escape button where the main character gets into trouble, uses time power, and it doesn't just send her one direction, they go backwards and forwards, and it also changes her location. And so the authors kind of use this as a way to get her out of her predicaments, but also put her in different situations where she can see other threats, other influences, kind of do a little bit of world exploring, world building. And that it's kind of used in that respect as a kind of catch-all to get her in and out of trouble that's caused by this same power. And I was like, that to me it's really just kind of ruined the story to a degree, because again, the main character is not earning her power. She's not earning this information. She's just really doing plopped in situations, and she stumbles her way through without any real effort to resolve them on her. Other people tend to come in and out of life and help her with the situation. And unfortunately, like in a lot of game mechanics, their importance rather to the story kind of get twisted. Some information established at the beginning of the story, as far as game mechanics go, no longer apply to the main character as the story goes. And again, there is a story revelation that tries to explain this away, but it was kind of predictable. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. So there it is. It is what it is. Other story twists, again, I'm not trying not to spoil much of them, but it always seemed that the story was struggling with itself to kind of maintain this balance between the game elements and what's supposed to be an MMO and this kind of fantasy time travel story. And for me, it created a lot of plot holes where I was like, oh, that stuff at the beginning doesn't apply here, or this is a lie here, or there's a big plot hole, or this shouldn't happen according to what we've already been told. And it kind of ruined, because a lot of the things I like about a LitRPG story is that the game mechanics matter. They are as hard coded into the system as physics are. And so if you learn the game rules, if you learn how the system works, that's how you gain control. That's how you gain power. That's how you gain the ability to improve your life and your situation, because you understand the rules, and the rules matter. And the class system matters. And unfortunately for the story, to a degree, that just kind of disappears as story goes. And not to say that the mechanics themselves disappear. The main character still levels. She still applies some stat points here and there and some other skill abilities. But fundamentally, no, doesn't matter. Not as far as they go. Again, the one new power she gets is that she gets any power she needs in the situation as it dictates, and it just magically appears. In addition to the ability to travel through time and space, apparently, and so those things tend to matter more to the plot line, unfortunately. Also, small technical pet peeve about this story. It has pages and pages and pages of stat sheets. There is really no need to show like the full character sheet with like all those details every single time the main character leveled. After like the first couple times, it felt like a lot of filler. I would have been perfectly okay to just like see the changes, the things that you actually changed if you leveled, or distributed stat points or class skills or whatever the case was going to be, or just reminders, like, oh, this is a thing she has, this is a particular stat, because it really ended up being like page after page after page after page of stuff that didn't matter to this particular situation. It was just kind of there because it was there, and it ended up feeling a little like filler, unfortunately. Small thing, didn't really affect the score either way. It's just, that probably could have been a little better. Overall, again, I liked some elements, especially that first game chess playing scene. I thought that was really nicely done, but the story didn't work for me. Worse, as it progressed, I really ended up not liking, especially the way the story resolves the antagonist issue. I thought that was terrible. Not on a technical writing level, but I was like, it doesn't make logical sense that the person, and again, this isn't spoilery, it's in the description that the main character is tortured, but the person who tortures her, she essentially just like, and this is a little bit spoilery, so clear out, stop the video if you don't want to hear it, but it bugged me so much, it kind of one of the things that ruined it for me. She doesn't kill him when she has a chance. And I'm like, this is after she's been physically and mentally tortured. She gets a chance, and there's some story game elements that are just super forced to prevent her to a degree. But time and again, multiple times in the story, she just is like, no, we can't kill him. He's going to be super important in helping us to deal with this other threat. I mean, this is literally the person that tortured her for days and weeks or whatever on end, mentally, physically. And I'm like, okay, no reasonable person is not going to take some revenge on this character, even with the restrictions that are placed on her by the forced magical powers. So one of those things. So there you go. And a bigger issue for me again is that the story was always kind of in conflict with itself thematically between the game elements, the MMO stuff that's really talked about at the beginning of the story as being a major thing, and the eventual fantasy time travel thing that goes on in the story. And so for me, that disjointedness kind of just pushed it past, this doesn't work for me, to I don't like this story to a big degree, unfortunately. And I've liked the author's other works. They have other things that they've done that are more humorous, and plenty of fans are liked it. It's just that this one it had so many things that I didn't enjoy, and I'm going to score 4 out of 10. So that's Aethermarked, a dark fantasy GameLit Isekai story with a score of 4 out of 10. Okay, next up is going to be a review for online comic, a manhwa called The Tutorial is Too Hard. Okay, it is 26 chapters currently as of this recording. It's free online. There is no official English publisher. It's all fan translated. Here's the novel description. Comic description. One day, amidst a boring life, an invitation message appears before my eyes. Would you like to enter the tutorial world? Following it is a difficulty selection window. Easy, normal, hard, hell. I select hell difficulty without hesitation, and I regret it. I know it said hell difficulty, but this is just too much. There you go. That is seriously the premise, and it really does run with that. It's a slice of life story where a bunch of people find themselves transported to a place where they have RPG powers and fight monsters, avoid traps, and dungeon run to survive. It's not a very broad kind of RPG apocalypse story, but I think that what they're going for eventually. And it's told from the perspective of the main character, who's chosen the hardest hell setting for his difficulty challenge rating. And he goes through these tests, and he really does go through hell. His pain setting is set to maximum. He's all by himself because nobody else chose this. And so he has to figure out how to survive and how to fight the monsters that appear and the traps and the things. And there's no easy answer to it. It's just that it just hard grinding to get any little bit of experience, any level gains, any skill gains he can, and any way to exploit anything in the system to survive and to level up and gain powers. It does get a little dark occasionally. It's definitely violent. And gradually as the story progresses, there's also a secondary plotline where he connects to the other people who are going through the same situation, just on different levels. Like everybody who chose different difficulty levels is at a different instance. And because he's the one who chose this super hard one, he's there alone. And other people have other issues, and he's communicating through like this message bulletin board system. And so it was a kind of a nice way to flesh out what the other characters doing and build out their problems. And I'm assuming they're connected to this planet at some point, and even things that are happening in the outside world as wave after wave of people come and go and die or survive in this tutorial, world. But a lot of the story is just the main character going through hardships and trials through these different kind of dungeon crawl situations. And then again, it's not a complicated story. It's entertaining. The artwork is really clean and crisp, and it conveys the action really well. Only thing I wish is that the story was updated more often, but it's about a week, once a week release schedule. So I'm enjoying it, but I've been waiting until I had at least 20 chapters available where I talk to you guys about it. I liked it. Its score is 7.7 out of 10. That's the tutorial is too hard, with the score 7.7 out of 10. Okay, that is it for the show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for listening, for watching. You can follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, and our website at LitRPGpodcast.com. You can listen to the show on Spotify and Audible. And of course, any podcasting app out there you have. We have links in the show notes for all those locations to find us and follow the podcast and see all the latest reviews that we shoot out on a regular basis. And of course, we also have links to several LitRPG Facebook groups where authors and readers come together or give out recommendations for their stories. A lot of people seeking recommendations for new things. They get addicted to the genre, like, what do I read next? And a lot of people have recommendations. If you enjoy the podcast, remember you can support us and find out all the ways to support us at litrpgpodcast.com/support. And until we can hang it again, folks, thank you very much for listening, for watching, for letting me into your lives. And until we can hang it again, remember to go read some Lit RPG. Goodbye, everybody.